Welcome to the week that was here at DeadlineDetroit.com. Whether it is morning where you are, afternoon, evening, whether you're watching us live on Deadline TV or picking up the podcast later, I think I'm confident in saying you are probably very cold because I'm freezing right now. Welcome. It's been quite a week, as it's always quite a week, usually in Metro Detroit. I don't think there have been many boring weeks since I've lived here. It's just a nonstop rock and roll fun news town, so let's get to it. My guests today are the boss, editor-in-chief and co-founder of Deadline Detroit, Alan Lengel, our legal genius coming down from the Ford building, Steve Fishman, Charlie Langton, who is a genius of his own sort.
The James Brown media. Of Detroit journalism.
The James Brown, the hardest working man in Detroit journalism. And political consultant and former journalist and boulevardier man around town, Greg Bowens. So let's get to it. It was a crazy week. It was a crazy week both here and in the world and in the nation at large. So why don't we start with probably the biggest one, which was the bombshell that landed around dinner time last Saturday, which was the University of Michigan very abruptly canning President Mark Schlissel. Who wants to take that one on first? Anyone?
I don't know. It's hard to get overly excited about this. I mean, they were saying, "Oh my God, he used the business email for." I mean. And granted, I guess having an affair with an underling or whatever, but they seem to emphasize that. Oh my God, he used his email, his business email, and that I don't know. Maybe I was missing
Lengel,
something.
Are you missing how stupid that is? I mean, this guy's got how many advanced degrees? He's a medical scientist. There are literal apps for cheating on which you can download.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, it just seems.
Hold on, Charlie.
Go ahead. No, let Charlie. Go ahead.
Charlie, go ahead.
I read a lot of those were flirtations. They were nothing. Kwame had some good emails.
Right.
Those were good. Stuff. But maybe that's what people at UofM. Maybe that's how they have flirt or whatever they do. I'm too intellectual. But I didn't see a whole lot of stuff. If you just looked at the texts and emails, I don't know why the guy got fired. I think there's more to this story.
Well, obviously. Steve?
There's a lot more to the story, in my opinion. I don't know anything per se, but I have read and I have heard that they're looking into some other things that he may have done, including they are looking into. It doesn't mean it's true or it's accurate, whether he may have even taken a few dollars from the university, okay? But the most important thing that I can't believe you guys didn't read is that they had passed I don't know about passed, they had set up something that said that you cannot screw around with subordinates. So they didn't say it like that, I'm sure. And that's really what the problem is. This is Bill Clinton. This is all these guys who do this kind of stuff. And we've talked about it before. And quite frankly, the University of Michigan shouldn't put up with it. And no other workplace should put up with it. There is no excuse for any male messing with someone who works with him and who is subordinate to him. And it's almost always someone who's 40 years younger than him. But it's the subordinate nature of it. And they have a policy in place that they put in after the provost was found screwing around with whoever he was screwing around with. So he's in direct violation of that policy. I agree with you guys. Compared to what you guys are used to looking at when you're snooping around in people's emails, I agree. It looks like an 11-year-old guy, which is probably his maturity level when it comes to women, which is true of many men, as you know, Nancy. Okay. I mean, it looked like an 11-year-old putting out flirtatious little crap to a 9-year-old who sits in front of him in his science class in 4th grade. But
you are absolutely correct, and you have hit the nail on the head. It is not the fact that he had a relationship, flirtatious or otherwise, with somebody outside his marriage. It's that she worked for him,
right?
And she apparently worked. I mean, she worked directly for him. From the you know, I don't know who this woman is. I imagine we'll at least hear at some point, but it really looked from the communications like she was some sort of support person in the office, a scheduler, an assistant, maybe even a vice president, in charge of, some subset of the university. But she was absolutely reporting to him. And you're right. And when you said before, Steve, that no man can have a relationship with an underling, the same thing goes for women. So, it's not the relationship, it's the power imbalance.
I was a little.
I haven't heard about any men complaining.
Sorry,
Which to my usual drum I bang on, not just on this show, but when I talk to anybody, and I started banging on it when Clinton did what he did with Monica Lewinsky. If Clinton would have been forced to resign or would have had enough balls, I hate to use that word, to resign and admit that what he did was absolutely outrageous. That's what started all this shit, was the president of the United States pulling crap like that with a 21-year-old girl from L.A. And his idea of an affair is, what he in a closet smoking a cigar. That's what he thinks is an affair. That's where all this crap started. And one of these days, these men are going to get it. And they're going to understand, leave the goddamn subordinates alone. That's it.
I think Matt Lauer is an example of,
another one
who got it. I was a little bit taken aback that Schlissel was using kniches as a alluring thing in there, right?
Is that what it takes? Is that what it is?
I think it's a knish that really was the seal. It sealed the deal.
Hey, if that's the case, my grandmother would have had 50 lovers. What are you talking about? She made great knish.
As somebody,
a mustache and part of a beard, but other than that,
as somebody,
can we say this one thing? I think it was they had to fire the guy after the way they treated the brother. I mean, the AD guy, what was his name? The brother,
Martin Filbert.
Yeah, and I mean, but his seemed like way more egregious. At least the details that they had put out sounded a lot more salacious than these nerdy emails that this guy sent. And but make no mistake about it, people were paying attention. And this is after, Schlissel, how you say his name? Schlissel. My Schlissel for Flissel. As Snoop Dogg would say.
For shizzle.
For shizzle, my slizzle. He had stood up on that righteous soapbox, preaching about, what the university is going to do and all this stuff. And think about it. While he's on that soapbox, raking the brother over the coals, who was the AD, about his behavior, he's sending off these goofy emails to somebody. Now, surely there've got to be more details than this that warrant a removal as the provost as the president of the university. You know what I'm saying? But you do have that dynamic, which I'm sure we'll get to later, because you got the Gabe Leland and you got the other city council guy.
Are you trying to say that Filbert was treated harshly because he was black? Or, this guy had a long history of macking on women, and it's just, I just don't see this as having
Nancy, you confuse what I'm saying. I'm saying Schlissel had to get the axe. Had to get the axe because of the way that they treated the brother, because of his behavior, and so there's no way that this guy could have got a pass, because that just would have been wrong.
Right.
On so many levels. But sometimes you got to, unfortunately, the lens of race goes through this. Lingo brought up the Jewish food thingy. the lure of some Jewish snack as a reward.
Go ahead, Charlie.
He may have lost his presidency in $970, almost $1 million a year, but is he going to lose his tenure? He is still a tenured professor, even under that agreement. So now you're going to tell me that if the U of M Board of Regents really wants this guy out, they may have to buy him out. They may have to buy him out of his tenure. And I think that would be disgusting. If he should lose his job as a presidency, that should be enough to lose his tenure. But I'll tell you what, I bet it's not. And he's probably lawyering up right now.
I don't know enough about how universities handle that kind of stuff. Tenure is, it's a great privilege, but it's granted to assure academic independence, right? It's not the same as having a contract with a private employer that you have to be bought out of. So I don't know that I think there's a lot of ways you can sever tenure for cause. And I would imagine that, like you just said, if his behavior was bad enough to be dismissed as president of the college, my guess is they probably have enough to cut his tenure too. In fact, that's the other thing about this insanely generous severance package that they had agreed to, because the board doesn't like this guy, hasn't liked him for quite some time. I mean, it was something like $10 million. I mean, it was just insane. That all went away when he got canned. So that would be my guess. So anyway, anybody else? Go ahead.
If you're doing remote learning, I mean, well, I don't know. He did use an email, so yeah. I was going to say maybe the remote learning could be like, a way to get past being able to retain your tenure.
That's the other thing. Why don't people understand that you cannot use the work email for this stuff? I mean, it's so easy now. You're working on your company laptop. You've got the browser open. You keep one tab open for your Gmail. Your Gmail is private. They don't have any kind of rights to go through that at all. You talk to her on your personal Gmail. You don't use your umich.edu address. I mean, that's just insane. But anyway, all right. As long as we're in Ann Arbor, let's also talk a little bit about the Dr. Anderson settlement, which was the other big bombshell that dropped this week out of Ann Arbor. $490 million for how many? Steve, you were talking before we went on the air. How many total?
Somewhere around 1,050, but I choose to round it off. It's 1,000 claimants and 450 million. That's the way I would look at it if I was analyzing it, because 30 million is being held for those who may not have yet come forward.
Right. Okay. So this is the settlement that's being paid to the victims, survivors, whatever word you want to call, of Dr. Robert Anderson, who was the athletic department physician for many years at the University of Michigan, and apparently could not keep his hands off of the athletes, especially the boys, which is basically who he handled, so to speak. Is this fair? This is a little bit less than what the gymnasts who had to endure Dr. Nasser in Michigan State got, but it is a very healthy sum. Anybody want to take that one up? Charlie?
Mr. Fishman.
The only thing on Michigan State, there were half the claimants, only 500. So theoretically, roughly, people at Michigan State, the survivors there, got double what the survivors at UofM got for roughly.
Very true.
But the structure of the settlement was basically the same. One little difference, though, is that Michigan State decided they're going to do a bond. Whatever insurance doesn't pay, they're going to issue bonds to pay off the settlement, and they're going to cut some costs. As I understand it, talking to Jordan Acker this week, is that UofM, they've got so much money that what they're going to do is whatever insurance doesn't pay, they're just going to write a check.
Yeah.
So, but it's probably a good settlement overall. I mean, you want to end it. A little older plaintiffs maybe at UofM, and obviously Anderson is dead. Nasser's not, but nevertheless, it's interesting how much money. There's a $17 billion. Steve, is that right? $17 billion in endowment at Michigan at UofM, and then they've got an income of about $7 billion a year in all their ventures that they have. I mean, I think that's the biggest news that I found this whole week.
Yeah. Why are they charging tuition anyway?
I don't know.
Steve, you're the athlete. You're the former U of M athlete. You take it from here.
Well, I don't know anything about. I know that Michigan has a big endowment. I don't know anything about the financing. I don't know anything about the insurance companies. I just know that Doc Anderson came there when we were freshmen, and that we had our first contact with him when we were sophomores, because freshmen weren't eligible in those days. And everything that people are saying about how he acted is accurate. And I can tell you that from my own personal experience and from all of my teammates and all the ball players, obviously the basketball guys and football guys and hockey guys that I knew that came after me. There are really a couple of things that to me are most noteworthy. And I'm not big on going into long stories about how did I feel, what did it mean to me, blah, blah, blah. I leave that for the younger people because that's a little more like the way they think. But the two most interesting things to me about it, three really, was one, you didn't have a choice. This is what people have to understand. The difference between the ball players or the athletes and the civilians, there were students that he did it to. We had to have physicals in order to play. That's all there was to it. And Doc Anderson was the team doctor. And that also meant that if you were a regular person who didn't have a family doctor, for instance, no matter what happened to you, it didn't have to even be an athletic injury. It could be you had the flu, or you had, like I had, walking mono. They'd say, go see Doc Anderson. And Doc Anderson was the type of guy, every time you went to see him, he thought for some reason it was very important that you pull your drawers down, and then he would have his little finger stuff.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that, again, I don't pretend to be, one of these guys who sits around and, whines about what happened to him in the past. But I know it was true in my case, and I know it's true in an awful lot of friends of mine. A lot of us had sons who were basketball players and who were going to college to play basketball. And 40 years after I left Michigan, in 2009, when my son graduated, I had never said a word about Doc Anderson. I sat him down and I told him exactly what happened to us. And I told him, if somebody tries to pull some crap like that on you, you get up and leave and you call me. And from talking to my teammates and guys younger who also played at Michigan, I can't tell you the number of guys who had that conversation with their son. And that should tell you something without being a psychiatrist or whining about, oh, me, poor me. All I can tell you is all of us, it must have been in our minds, because we sure made sure it didn't happen to our sons. The third thing is, just so you want the totality of it, the worst thing about the Doc Anderson thing, aside from what he did, is that in 1980, think about this. The guy came in the fall of '66 when we were freshmen. 1980, he was canned from the health service because there were complaints by students. Now, as the civil lawyers know, they kind of, mush it all together. They don't really say that. They tell him, you resign, we won't put it in your whatever. There's no way that the athletic director didn't know what had happened with Anderson. And they kept that motherfucker around from 1980 to 2004. 24 more years of having his fun with the athletes, all of whom thought they had to do it to play, and most of whom didn't have family doctors, and many of whom thought, God damn it, not only, especially if they're from the city, they'll send me home and take my scholarship. And that was a reasonable thing for those people to think.
Why do you think they did not? Why do you think they let him continue on for so long?
Alan, that is the question for the ages, and we have had that discussion amongst all of us, that played there. And I do not believe that he had something on anybody. I don't believe that, because there's nothing he could have had on anybody. What, on Don Canham or Bo Schembechler or Johnny Orr? He didn't have anything on anyone. We kind of think that it was one of those situations where most of us didn't say anything to the coaches. We never said anything. We just used to talk amongst each other. We didn't tell our parents. We didn't tell the coaches. But even if Bo did learn a little something, or one of our coaches learned something, it's in those days, you got to remember, the world was different than it is now. If you went in the Army, you got it up your butt. A lot of these guys were, my father was a naval officer. If he'd have been around and I told him, he'd have probably said, well, you get it in the Navy. So blah, 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 blah. I don't think there was anything, the media loves to say, oh, he must have had something on that. That's bullshit. They just kind of.
He must have been well regarded by some people.
Let me tell you something. The guy didn't do shit. We had a surgeon, Dr. O'Connor. He was a great surgeon. If you got hurt, really hurt, we had a great surgeon. This guy didn't do anything. What did he do? We had a big tub of ice. When we were there, they throw you in a tub of ice. So you didn't need in for that.
Can I just point out?
Steve, I'm not. Steve,
go ahead.
Sorry, Nancy. I'm just kind of struck by the stories that you're telling in relationship to your time at UofM. Are you telling us that you are part of the settlement?
Of course, I played there. Of course, I'm part of the settlement. Everybody I played with is a plaintiff. Of course.
Wow.
People are so surprised at that. I don't understand that. Why would they be surprised? I'm not a civil lawyer. I was just a guy that he did it to, just like a lot of 1,000 other guys, maybe 700 of which are athletes. And yeah, of course
The real crime here, though, is that Michigan. I was talking to someone, a wrestler, 1975, Tad DeLuca. He's been out there. He's talked quite a bit, but he claims he wrote a letter in 1975 outlining exactly what happened to him. Gave that letter to the athletic director, his coach, etc., and nothing happened. Zero. So UofM covered up this for a long time, and I believe that they knew, but they just swept it under the rug. For whatever reason, don't know, but they just did. Maybe because they didn't want to get sued, or they didn't want the bad publicity, or whatever. But it's It was
Like
it
the
was a
Catholic Church.
I was just going to say, we have learned this lesson probably in the modern era, well, many, many, many times. But in the modern era, let's just start with 2000 and the Catholic Church. And we learned it through MSU, and we've learned it through a million, sports or youth sports organizations, the Boy Scouts, all of these. When a powerful institution is threatened, and even having this guy quietly dismissed would constitute a threat because it would give him a reason to come back at them somehow. When a powerful institution is threatened, it always will defend itself before it will defend the people under its care who have been hurt. And that's just the way it is.
It's a typical institution, like the church, Penn
Yes.
State, Michigan State.
They
care about the image of the institution. They care about the donors, and thirdly, they care about the people they serve. They are not a top priority in the same way that the church, the congregants were not a top priority. It's the image and the money and the donors, and it's really it's so ingrained in these institutions that have images that are, U of M has this amazing image, and they bring in a lot of money. And that's so important to their existence.
And that's very true. But I think in this case, we also, in the Penn State case as well, we also have to consider what Steve kind of alluded to before, which is it was a different time. Attitudes toward homosexuality have changed massively just in my adult lifetime, not my entire lifetime. I mean, I think about how, look at just talking about it. I mean, people snicker and they think it's a joke and it's no big deal. But the fact that he did this to Steve, and, Steve was not, scarred for life by it, but he remembered it well enough to bring it up with his own son 40 years later. So, I mean, it was a different time, and it was a different attitude toward, homosexuality, toward criminal sexual assault. I think we were talking before the show started that at the time this happened, there was no such thing as, there was rape, which was something that was done to women, and it was penetration. But there wasn't really a similar charge that you could make against a man for doing the same thing to a man. So,
let me just try.
Well, how do you know that he was gay? I mean, that's the thing that I don't really. I mean, seriously, I have a problem with. I don't think that it's fair to the gay community to label this predator as somehow normal behavior gay or something.
He was a deviant.
Not every gay guy is sticking his finger up some.
Of course
some
not. And I didn't say that, but I mean, not every straight guy rapes women either. I mean, he was a gay man with a deviant sexuality. I mean, let me put it that way.
Well, how do you know he was gay? That's the thing I keep wondering.
Right. Let's see.
I keep asking.
One of the people that he assaulted was what must have been a very sweet and trusting football player who he had masturbating in front of him to collect semen, and he told him it was from some sort of experiment that he was doing he was trying to it sounds like something out of Mandingo. He was trying to breed the ultimate athlete, using this guy's semen somehow. It's like when you have charged a man or asked a man to masturbate in front of you, please, I think that's pretty gay. So you were going to say something.
I don't, Nancy, I hear what you're saying, but guys, haven't you ever heard of circle jerking? That doesn't make them all gay.
Go ahead.
I go with Nancy. My vote goes with Nancy on this one.
All right, Steve and then Charlie. Steve.
Well, no, let Charlie go and I'll summarize.
Oh, I'm not touching that one, so to speak. No way.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
So I think first thing, I don't know. You guys are making definitive statements, all three of you, Charlie, Nance, and Alan. You're making definitive statements that you say the university did this and here's why they did it and blah, blah, blah. I don't know that. And I don't know what information you have to cause you to be able to make that kind of a definitive statement. That's the first thing. Number two, you have to understand, we were the first group, basically, in the late 60s. The mid to late 60s. We never heard any of this about the wrestler who says he wrote the letter and this other guy who's what you just described. That that Anderson supposedly got him to do. We never knew any of that stuff because none of that kind of stuff happened with us. None of that stuff, which brings me to my third point. I'm not getting into a discussion of what the hell the guy was. I just know the crap he did was crazy. But I do think he had a predator's instinct for who he could get away with doing some of the things that he did and who he couldn't. And I'm positive from my own experience. I looked at him funny one time, and immediately he changed entirely. He didn't know that my mother had two brothers who were doctors. That I didn't know shit about it, but I did have someone I could talk to about it. But there was something about the way I looked at him when I asked him something that all of a sudden he changed. So I think to the extent that he did what he did to some of these other people, somehow in the predator's mind, somehow he figured he could get away with it, which obviously he did, unless, except for the wrestler, assuming he wrote that letter, I got to believe he did. Why would he make it up? But everybody else, I think this guy had that instinct that predators have as to maybe I can push this a little further with this person where with our guys, I never heard anything like that. And I'm pretty sure nothing like that ever happened because we probably had a different way of looking at him. And he figured, okay, he can get away with the one thing but if he carries it any further, somebody's going to punch him in the face.
Yeah,
you know?
Those guys have an instinct for that.
Charlie?
You know, one question that you didn't.
Too, though, Greg. I mean, like Larry, a doctor. So these are doctors. So you know what? Doctors are very prestigious and they're held in very high esteem by many, many people. So if you challenge someone, essentially, not only are you challenging the act of what they did, but you're actually challenging a doctor. And I think that doctors, especially when you've got a teenager challenging, the powers that be are going to say, we're going to go with our doctor. And I think that like Larry Nassar and maybe and Anderson, I think they could have justified in their own weird mind that maybe there is some science they're going to discover or something from this. I'm not saying it's legit, it's right, but in their own mind, these predators come up with something, a justification that a non-doctor would not be able to undo, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's probably.
Well, right. One thing that we haven't talked about that I think is really important, Nancy and Alan, Steve, and everybody, is the culture and that had existed at U of M, in particular, since we're talking about U of M, that allowed for this to happen. I mean, Steve, you said what was going on, people had to know, but what was it about the culture at the University of Michigan that allowed for this? And even, people would go wink, wink, go in and bend over, I mean, that culture hasn't been addressed, I don't think. I'm
not sure what you mean by the culture. I can tell you from our group of guys, the ball players talk to each other. And we knew the guy was funny. That was the word we used in those days. I mean, I apologize for not being able to speak in all this modern lingo that everybody talks about, but we just knew that's the way the guy was. We would talk to each other. We would, kind of like, oh, God, we got to go see that motherfucker, that kind of thing. But we never told the coaches. One person did, but that was when we were freshmen. But we never really said anything to anybody else about it. We talked to the next guys that came in, told them they ought to go with somebody else too because the guy's funny. But it's just hard to describe the way people talk now. When I was on the thing last night, listening to Charlie, listening to Ben, I mean, this is just a different world. To me, I have to tell you, Larry Nassar and Doc Anderson, they talk about why was it double? I know why I think it was double. They're females, that's why. And I'm tired of hearing people like Charlie and Ben, my own lawyer, telling me, oh, no, it's exactly the same. But to me, it ain't. And plus, some of them were 14 or 15, which we weren't. Yeah. I mean, it's bad what happened to us. But to compare it to Nassar, in my opinion, is insane. Sandusky, he was 14-year-old boys, 13-year-old boys at Penn State. That's not the same. It's just not the same. What he did, in all honesty, it was done in the proper way. If you went to the military, they did it. He just had no business pulling the shit he was pulling on guys who had no reason to have that kind of a. And I will tell you one other thing, that me and a lot of other people, we didn't have physicals for a long time. A lot of guys didn't. And the reason we didn't, and all the males know, what's the thing everybody hates the most about the physical? Bend over.
The finger.
And so I didn't have a physical till I was in my 40s. And a lot of people, a lot of my teammates had the same experience. And the only reason they didn't was they didn't want it up their butt again.
Exactly.
Well, and this is why when I go to the doctor, I go, give me the blood test instead of the prostate exam.
All right, let's move on.
Yeah,
We've
let's
spent
move
enough
on.
time with this dead guy.
There is a blood test you can take in. You don't need to
Yes.
do that.
Yes.
There is, but there's never mind. Let's
Let's
none
not
of
get
us
into
are
that.
doctors
'Cause
here.
I got a
so-
little bit too much personal experience with that. so.
Okay. All right. So moving on, let's get back to Detroit here. Andre Spivey sentenced this week to 2 years behind bars for accepting bribes. It drew a lot of immediate comparisons to the Gabe Leland case, which was similar but not. And if Steve would like to sit this one out because he was Gabe Leland's lawyer, he can. But I'm going to allow the rest of you to take it away. Alan, go ahead.
I'll say I want to say Judge Victoria Roberts did a great job during the sentencing. She addressed the issue of Gabe Leland, and at the same time, she said, "I mean, look, the Gabe Leland case was different. They had a horrible witness, Bob Carmack, and people say, well, they had it on recording, but I covered a case in Leon Jenkins, a 36th District Court judge back in the late 80s. They had him on video, FBI video, taking bribes from a party store owner to fix tickets, and it was very specifically said $150 for this ticket, $175, and he was charged with 5 counts. In the middle of the case, we were out in the hallway one day, and the judge comes up to me and says, "So what do you think?" And I go, I don't know. And he goes, and they just played some videos of him taking bribes, and I go, I don't know. And he finally pushes me and he says, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "Guilty." And he looked at me and said, "You'll see." Well, it came out 5 count. We were all predicting guilty 4 out of 5, guilty 3 out of 5. He was acquitted on 4 counts, and they hung on the 5th. And the judge had told the jury, you cannot consider entrapment. He's a judge. He knows the law. They disregarded that. They retried on the 5th count, and the government lost again. So there are, regardless of recordings and stuff. And I think the government realized, with Steve Fishman being an attorney, a very able attorney, that it could turn into a clown show. They had a guy, Bob Carmack, who had done a lot of foolish and crazy things, and he became a horrible witness. So that taken into account, Gabe Leland should have went to prison. And Spivey should have went to prison as well. And so I think she was limited. Monica Conyers, I think, got a little over 3 years for bribery. This guy should have gotten probably more, but under the circumstances with Gabe Leland, the judge took that into account, I think, and gave him 2 years, and I think that was about right. So
I think Spivey got a break. The judge sentenced to under the guideline, under the recommendations anyway,
right.
Which he can do. But I don't know. Listen, Steve Fishman probably knows this better. But to me, when I look at these 2 cases, totally different to me. Yes, there's an overwhelming towing issue, but I think it is. Alan, you said Bob Carmack was their star witness on Leland. My God, that's the government star witness, and it was only one time. It was $7,500, I guess, and Steve Fishman did a great job on that one. But on this other Spivey, as I understand it, there was a multi-year investigation.
5 years. Well,
not 5 years. And
it started in 2018, the investigation, but the bribery was over 5 years.
Yeah, but you've got multiple years and you've got oodles of witnesses, FBI agents who are generally, they can be pretty good. You got 1, you got 2, as opposed to 1 or minimal witnesses in the Leland case. So, the amount is different. The investigation intensity is different. Just so many different things. And listen, I think Spivey, from what we read in the paper and Deadline Detroit, he is cooperating with the government. So he obviously, if he's cooperating, he must know something. And so he was far more involved than Leland was involved in this whole situation.
Well, the cooperation, that was an issue during the sentencing, because one, he agreed to cooperate, but at the same time he was lying to the FBI, and so they didn't end up using him as a cooperator. And he was telling people that the FBI was investigating, so they were like, "No, we're not going to use you." Although his attorney says he bought 4 sports coats to fit for wiretaps.
What about the sports coats?
Yeah, and he was going to wear spy glasses. It was all set, but they didn't want to use him because he was, and Steve can maybe speak to this part, at least in any case. If you're going to cooperate, you can't lie. Once you lie, that's it. And Charlie, that as an attorney as well, that ends your possibilities of cooperating.
Well, you guys, I think the question about the sentencing between Gabe and Spivey gets viewed through the lens of what folks have experienced to be an unfair justice system. And it's easy to sort of, put it up there that white guy gets probation, black guy gets, sentenced to prison. And it's easy for people to think about that because the way the justice system has been unfair to Black and brown folks for so long. And I think it's important to be able to address those kind of things. Now, Dawn Isom, who, the first Black woman U.S. attorney, who is, people know her here. I mean, she was a badass defense attorney. She went to Cass, she went to Spelman, she went to Wayne State. I mean, if the department is saying under her, and, that's all we can see because I'm sure this thing came out before, but if anything, people would expect for her to be fair when it comes to these kinds of things. And yet, we still see the unfairness, at least on the surface of what we're talking about. And that's why, Charlie, you got to work so hard to explain, and Alan, why, it's different between the two. Spivey was a pastor here of First Baptist, the oldest Black church, the first one settled here in the United States, and then went to city council. It's not like this guy came to the public stage, with some kind of shady background or something. And so were it not for this situation that that he got caught up in or involved in and stuff like that, he spent a lifetime of servicing the community in trustworthy kinds of positions. And people wonder whether or not that gives you the benefit of the doubt in some way, or not a pass, but at the same time, does it count for anything? So, I think it's important to be able to talk about these kinds of things and not be shy to talk or afraid to talk about it from the obvious perspective.
It's as a Detroiter, as a Detroiter, it just makes me so mad to see the long history of corruption in City Hall, on the City Council. We've got, I don't know what's going to happen to the other two who are under investigation, but we certainly had two people convicted of felonies, and they're not the first. We've had Monica Conyers, we've had others, and it's not, I don't care what good background you have. Look, it makes it all the worse that he was a preacher, that I'm sure he was a good, the judge says, good father, good husband, good member of the community to some degree, but don't take those jobs if, I think a lot of those people don't go in with the intention that they're going to be corrupt, but they lose their way sometimes. And, he certainly lost his way. So,
okay.
So you want to hear the truth now?
Yes. You can't handle the truth.
I want to hear the truth.
One of the most unfortunate things, and it's not any surprise to anyone about this country, because of the despicable way that Black people have been treated since the country was born, is that every single time there's a difference, there's a white guy and a black guy, every single time everybody wants to talk about race. And that's fine. The problem is, in this case, it wouldn't have mattered if Gabe Leland was purple with yellow stripes and Spivey was orange. The cases are not the same. I've been trying to tell the press. I talked to the guy from the news. I gave him a statement, and instead he winds up printing all the crap that was in the sentencing memo of the government about Leland's case. Here's the situation, just so you know. I don't want to hear any more about Bob Carmack. I don't want to hear another word about it was the same. There was no fucking bribery in Gabe Leland's case, okay? There was no bribery. You talk about the tapes were my best evidence. And I told the press that, but nobody fucking listens.
Well, explain that. Can you explain that?
Yeah, tell us more.
I said, this case is horseshit. I said it when we walked out of federal court, and I never talk to the media when I have a case, because most of the time I don't have all that much positive to say. The case involved him taking a cash contribution, which is illegal under Michigan law. So what did they do? They dismissed the case they never should have brought in the first place. Whether Carmack was the world's biggest asshole or he was the greatest witness in the history of the planet. They dismissed the case that should have been a state court case from the beginning. They took it to state court. They charged him and they let him plead to misconduct in office, which obviously taking a cash contribution in violation of law is misconduct in office. And they agreed he shouldn't go to jail for it. Because quite frankly, do you have any idea how many people take cash contributions, not just on the council, but everywhere else? 100% of the elected officials probably do it. Okay.
Did he file it with his campaign once he got the money?
Of course. So now that's the next point. Andre Spivey, by the way, so Greg knows, Judge Roberts' sentence, the only thing I agree with you guys, and I agree with Lengo, it was a perfect sentence. Why? Because he went to jail where he has to go to jail because he took money and stuffed it in his pocket, okay? The reason he got the lower sentence from what the government wanted and from what his guidelines were just what Greg was saying. He's been a pastor. He's done a lot of good in the community. It's not because he's black or whether he's purple. It's because he had done a lot of good, just like a lot of other defendants. We get most of our sentences nowadays are beneath the sentencing guidelines. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody ever writes about it. You guys in the press always make it sound like it's a big fucking deal because the sentence was below the guidelines. The judge took into consideration everything Greg said and gave him a sentence below the guidelines. But the difference is nobody, not Carmack, not the government, not anybody contended that Gabe Leland put 1 penny of that stinking $7,500 in his pocket. Everyone agreed. What did they do with it? You guys are involved in politics, particularly in the city, know what they do with it. You got to hire guys in the streets to go get the old ladies and get them to the polls, et cetera. What are you going to do? Write them a check? A guy over there on 7 Mile and Roselawn? He don't want a check. He wants money. And every penny of that money, and they had evidence of it, was spent in the pursuit of on election day, blah, 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 blah. He didn't take a penny. And you want to talk about the tapes? How about 4 times on the tape, Leland tells Carmack, I can't take cash. I need a fucking check. That's exactly how he said it. Then stupidly, he took the cash. And that's the only crime he committed. I'm sick and tired of hearing about how it's the same. There was bribery. There wasn't any bribery. That's
all
it.
right. Okay.
All right, I'm done.
We're deep in the weeds on this one, so.
Oh, I like it. I think we need.
But you are the guy I'm hiring when I get arrested.
It's important. It's important for Steve to put that out there.
Because
I think it is important. It's very important, but it's also important that we need to be honest and address the way that people look at the legal system, where they can jump to those kind of conclusions right off the bat, as opposed to considering all the things that Steve and Charlie and Alan and all you guys have said. You know what I mean? People have to get past this mistrust of the justice system in order to be able to consider these other kinds of mitigating factors.
But I have one more question for Steve. Was it not, and correct me, you've probably gone over the tape a million times, was it not an understanding, why don't you donate to my campaign and I'll look into this property situation for you?
Number one, there wasn't any why don't you donate. Carmack was wired up. He was working for the government. He brought up all the stuff about the money. Number one. Number two, this property that was supposed to be the thing, the property had already been sold by the time he gave him the cash contribution. It had already been sold. There was nothing anybody could do. So what?
Okay.
Where are we going?
Okay.
But you know,
The jury would have laughed their asses off.
Okay, Charlie's going to say one thing and then we're going to move on.
Be quick on it though. But I'll tell you what, I know Steve doesn't like talking about his cases while he's there, but I wish in a way that the lawyers would talk about them, to actually give us in the media their take on the case. And listen, I think it's important. And a lot of lawyers are not as articulate as Steve Fishman. However, it's this, this Oxford case. We can't get anything from Oxford schools, the defense attorney, and I know Tim Mullen. I talked to him, but nothing's on the record. We get these bits and pieces, and things are so mishmashed. And I think it does a disservice. Federal court, we can't bring in cameras, can't bring in tape recordings. There's a nice hearing, we can't record it. So we're trying to take notes, and it's just a pain. And I wish that the attorneys on both sides would go on and explain their position and answer some of the basic questions that reporters and the general public have.
But here's the problem. I got to answer that, and then we can go on the rest. Here's the problem with that. I told everybody standing in front of the goddamn federal building when we came out of the arraignment exactly what I just said to you without the goddams and the fucks in it. I told them all. But what does the press do? They do it this, and they're still doing it. Even James Dixon, who's a really good guy from the news, he buries my little quote in all this horse shit that Gardy wrote in the sentencing memo. So even when we tell you guys have the way you're going to look at a story. And the story always is, like Lengel's already thinking, well, he must have done this, or maybe he did that. It doesn't matter what the defense lawyers say. And then what happens when the guy's acquitted or the case is dismissed? The public is shocked. Why are they shocked? Because you guys have been giving him a steady diet of he did it, and here's what he did, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, that's it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's go to Washington. We have this last week, we had the official 1 year anniversary of the Biden administration. And a bombshell, not a bombshell, everything's a bombshell these days, a disappointment for Donald Trump, which is the Supreme Court ruling against his plea to keep his records privileged and away from the January 6th House committee. So we have our sitting president drew up his first year with probably more disappointments than huge successes, although I would argue that he's had quite a few successes, and you wouldn't know that from watching Fox. And President Trump, who basically got kicked in the teeth. Who wants to start with that? Charlie. Oh, no, Alan.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was going to say real quick, this is something that I've been thinking about, is that one of the things that the Democrats look inept when in fact the Democrats really do not have a Senate majority. I mean, we have two senators who are really Republicans. And so it's constantly like the Democrats are failing. They've got majority, but they don't have a majority. I mean, what do they say? Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, whatever. These guys are Republicans. And so it's really, they're voting with the Republicans all the time. And so Joe Biden gets this, he can't control. He's in control of both houses, and he can't do anything when in fact he's it's not the case.
It's a razor thin margin, and when you have Manchin and Sinema on your team, you might as well not have them on your team. So you're absolutely right about that. However, he did come out of the gate with a very ambitious domestic policy program that has pretty much fallen apart at this point. I mean, we're down to trying to get a few scraps of it passed. So that's disappointing. Charlie, you were going to say something?
This is the presidency on fire. That's what's going on.
Do we need to call 911? Go ahead, Charlie.
I think Biden has had some successes, to be honest with you. I mean, he passed a stimulus bill, and if people would get the vaccine and get the booster, and I think he's been doing all he can, but there are certain people that just won't get it. And what else can he do? He tried to mandate it, which is probably the right thing to do if this stuff is safe. The Supreme Court said no, but I'm not so sure that's his fault. I think a lot of points were made, so I think he's been okay. And I want to see every record that Trump. I want to see from January 6th. Let it all come out. Why should anybody be afraid of it? You know what? If Trump said let's go storm the Capitol, I don't know that he did. I don't know. I want to see it. Let's bring it all out. That's my.
I do too. And I think eventually it will come out. It's going to be, he's going to fight every step of the way, but I think eventually we're going to see it. I mean, the Supreme Court ruling was 8-1 in favor of releasing it. And the only holdout was that tub of uselessness, Clarence Thomas. Anyway, go ahead.
None of us. Every time Trump appeals to the Supreme Court, we all know that this is an exercise in futility. I don't even know why we take this stuff seriously when he does it, because we all know that it's just a delaying tactic to try and run the clock out for the midterm elections and get a new Congress, and this whole thing goes away. He hopes. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we know what we've got going on is Biden operating up against the backdrop of a country that just came out from under a madman who, every morning you woke up and your hair was on fire and you were like, oh my God, the world's going to end. Can you imagine what things would be like today if with Russia getting ready to invade the Ukraine and Trump was in office?
I can't.
On the one hand, we'd be worried like we're going to have a nuclear war by dinner time. On the other hand, we'd be thinking like, well, I guess Europe is just going to get run over because Trump isn't going to do anything.
I was just going to say Trump wouldn't do anything to that. He'd be cheering him on.
Probably so, but I mean, and so it's that backdrop against is where Biden is operating from. And so doing normal stuff, acting normally, taking measured steps are the kinds of things that we just aren't used to because we're all suffering from fucking political PTSD.
Very true. Very true. Alan, were you waving your hand around? You wanted to talk?
No.
Okay. All right. I did want to note, though, before we move on, that Steve's, he's been saying on this show for some time now that the election interference in Georgia is an absolute slam dunk. And yesterday, a Fulton County district attorney asked a judge to convene a special grand jury to investigate Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. This was big news, but it wasn't huge news yesterday. But I'm betting on the Silver Fox and the Ford building, and I'm thinking this may well end up being a much bigger case by the time it wraps. Go ahead.
The reason I'm glad you said it the way you said it. It wasn't huge news. That's because the jackasses in the press don't recognize what, and I'm talking about MSNBC and CNN. They're claiming to be liberals. Everybody's criticized, the right wingers. If they were real, they'd have had 14. They'd had Joyce Vance and Barb McQuaid, all of them sitting there. If I've been telling you guys this for how long, I can't remember how long. I've never been a prosecutor, but I know what a case is. And I am telling you, like I've said 1,000 times, when you've got the defendant's words on tape, Leon Jenkins' case you mentioned, I told the prosecutors, the reason he was acquitted was because they cross-examined the shit out of him and he came across very sympathetic. I think his wife had passed. He was raising 3 little kids. Right. All they had to do, I told them, just get up, play the thing and say, Mr. Jenkins, is that you? And that'll be the end of it. And that's what's going to happen.
You know what? Leon Jenkins, the thing was, he also, as you say, he got on the stand. He came off a little bit like a country bumpkin.
Right.
And people felt, as you say, people
I'm
felt
only using that as a point to make.
Right. Sure.
This story should be leading MSNBC. It should be on the front page of the New York Times. And instead, everybody's chasing around on whether Gabe Leland and Spivey were treated the same. I mean, that tells you something about the status of the press in this country. If it was the other way around, Fox News and all the right-wing shit, they'd be all over it. It'd be all you'd hear about all day long. And that's what it should have been here.
Yep. You're absolutely right. Steve is right not for a change, for as usual.
As always.
I mean, we can still get to that. I mean, again, going back to the political PTSD thing, anytime you go on Twitter or something like that, every day somebody is saying, oh, breaking news, Trump is about to be indicted. Breaking news, Trump is about to get, slammed in some kind of way, and it never is. And so, right. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I think we'll get there, Steve, when they drop that indictment.
Let me explain to you if you got a minute. Georgia has a very strange thing, and I just learned this today reading about it in the Washington Post. The reason they convened a special grand jury, the Raffensperger and Sterling and some of those Republicans, and I could see why even a lawyer would advise them, they were loath to just go and talk to them without a subpoena. For some reason, they can't issue a subpoena unless they convene this special grand jury. The way I understand it, though, it's not like a federal grand jury where that's the body that can subpoena people and can issue indictments. My understanding is the purpose of the special grand jury is to issue the subpoenas, let them come in, but then it gets sent back to the attorney general to make a decision, because this is state court. This is not federal court. So that, just so you guys know, that sounds like the reason that they did it. The fact that they did it tells you, in my view, that they think they got a case, and they just need to hear from these people live and under oath. And I'm sure both Sterling and Raffensperger are going to tell the truth because they have no choice, because they've been all over television saying it. And I think that's going to lead to an indictment in Georgia. And I think they'll convict his ass too.
And won't that be interesting going into 2024? So, okay. All right. I made a vow to myself when we started the show that I was going to try to bring it in under an hour, which means that it is time for the traditional Michael
and
drum
now,
roll.
It's time for Deadline Detroit's nominees for Schmuck of the Week.
That's right. It's time for the Schmuck of the Week, when we go through our notes and our tweets and try to figure out who was the biggest jackass of the previous 7 days. Who wants to go first? Langel?
Can I first
Yes, you go first,
Charlie,
Charlie.
go for it.
Absolutely.
take this one? It's got to be Mark Schlissel. It's got to be. The bad tax, loses his job. He embarrasses the university, and he looks weird every picture we have of him. I don't know, Schmuck. I know someone was going to take it, so I wanted to go first.
And I just want to say he gives a bad name for Knishes.
Are knishes always, are they sweet or are they savory?
No,
No.
there's potato or meat or
Yeah, there's meat, potato.
pasha.
So it's
Whatever.
it sounds like kind of like a samosa. So, okay.
Yeah,
All right. The food of
a
affliction.
Yiddish for
Okay. Anyone else who wants to go next? Greg?
Sure. My Schmuck of the Week.
Is
My Schmuck of the Week remains the Oxford School District. I tell you, man, until you hold these people accountable, there's no reason to send your kids back to that high school. You have to be insane to trust these fools with the safety of your kid after the way they blew this whole thing with the crumbly stuff. No way.
What
No
happened
way.
what happened this week that makes you
I
say
mean,
that?
what happened this week is that the district came out strongly blasting Jeffrey Feiger's lawsuit, saying he's reckless and blah, 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 as if they did everything perfectly. We don't want to hear about that stuff, man. You're sending these kids back to that high school after you did what? Sweep the floors and took down the goddamn teddy bears from in front of the school, the memorial, and that's going to be it? You're going to have them, I don't know, some counselors there and some fuzzy dogs that they can hug? This is ridiculous.
Mhm.
They give new cars.
Clear backpacks.
And clear backpacks, exactly. I mean, as if you're worried about them hiding weed, or something, in a backpack. This is dumb. This is dumb. Parents, don't trust those people. Don't send your kids back to that high school. Those people need to be held to account, and they haven't been. They have not been.
I would agree.
Ridiculous.
Charlie, did you start to say something?
No, they changed the school, painted it new carpet. They got a couple little things on there, but no, I think Oxford School has a lot of problems, and they're not being real media friendly.
The challenges to that, even, and this is nothing in comparison, but when I was at Oak Park High, we had a race riot, and I don't think anyone got hurt, but there was a lot of stuff that got broken and stuff like that. We didn't have school for several days. We came back, we had a rally. The principal told everyone, cool it. So we all kind of mocked them and walked around the hallways. But that was traumatic. So I can't imagine at this level how traumatic it is to return to school with something so devastating like that. And if they don't have the trust of the administration, as Greg says, there's certainly question marks about returning.
Yeah.
Can you imagine every time somebody slams the door, people are going to be freaking out in that school? It is ridiculous. You remember that they just board up that school, bulldoze it. I'm sorry, we're done.
I don't know that we have to go that far, but anyway.
But that's what they did with the school, the elementary school where this first happened. They ended up having to bulldoze it. I'm sorry.
There have been a lot of school shootings, and there have been a lot of fatalities. But I think, and I'm not trying to minimize this one at all, but the Sandy Hook was uniquely horrific. It was almost beyond comprehension. But so I can.
You're a fool if you send your kid back to Oxford High School.
Okay, well that's fair enough. So, Alan, Steve, who?
Steve, you want to go?
No, you go.
Okay. I got Clarence Thomas. The one dissenting vote on releasing Trump's records. Him and Alito are shameful. They're so intellectually dishonest, and intellectual may be the wrong word with these guys, but it's for Clarence Thomas to stand out there like that is just a disgrace to the legal profession. It's a disgrace to the Supreme Court. It's a disgrace to this country.
What's disgraceful is the fact that his wife.
Wait, time out. You haven't got to me yet, please.
No. I'm not. I'm just making a comment.
I hear what you're going to.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
Of course, the Jews always think alike. My Schmuck of the Week was also Clarence Thomas, but I was adding his wife, Ginny Thomas. And one of the things that a lot of people don't recognize unless they're lawyers or they've been in court is that judges have to disqualify themselves. They use the term recuse in court, but disqualify themselves when somebody, their family or a friend, or they own some stock in a company that's being sued, et cetera. His wife, it's pretty clear, and I think it'll become more clear as they get more of these texts and more of these things, was intimately involved in the events of January the 6th. She was involved in it. She might have been even advising it. She might have been present, whatever. He has as much business sitting on that case as you do sitting on a case involving NVIDIA stock if you own $1 billion worth of NVIDIA stock. So he's the schmuck of the week, but I make her the co-schmuck of the week since I already named her. And I'll tell you what else. I don't think it's even crossed his mind that he could disqualify himself. I'll bet he's so arrogant, and they're so isolated up there that they never talk to a regular human being who would say, wait a minute, your wife's in the middle of all this shit on behalf of Trump, and you're sitting there issuing the lone dissenting voice, even where a jackass like Alito doesn't do it?
Right.
That's my co-schmucks of the week. Clarence and Ginny Thomas. What a pair.
People wonder why we lose faith in the justice system.
That is excellent. All right. Well, that leaves it to me, and I am going to go with whoever the 25th or 26th or 50th lawyer was who proofed this statement that was made last weekend by an outfit called Heirloom Hospitality based in Birmingham, Michigan. A little background. There was a violent incident early Sunday morning, Saturday night at Prime and Proper Steakhouse, which is a very pricey, very high-end, very elite catering meat house on Capitol Park down in downtown. And what happened was a patron, and this seemed to be associated with the bar, which is in the basement below, but a patron became unruly. The security guard was trying to deal with him. He pulled a knife and stabbed the security guard, and the security guard pulled a gun and shot him, which tells you there's a lesson there about bringing a knife to a gunfight. But anyway, the patron was killed, and the security guard was pretty seriously wounded. He was taken to Detroit Receiving. And the next day, Heirloom Hospitality issued a statement which referred to him as, they said, "We're deeply saddened by the incident that occurred just after midnight on January 16th at Cash Only," that's the name of the bar, "involving a guest and a member of our third-party security contractor."
That really bugged me.
Well, I mean, I realize he probably was a third-party security contractor.
Yeah, but
once you have taken a knife to the midsection on behalf of the client that you're working for, I think you deserve a little more than to be identified as such in the statement of regret the next day. They could have at least just said a member of the team somehow, but you can tell, like I said, some lawyer took a look at that and said, "Oh, we can't call a member of the team, might try to sue us." But anyway,
that's what you get when you have a statement from a classy steakhouse.
Yeah,
they're trying to distance themselves.
Yeah, All right, then. That sort of brings us to the end. It's a little after 1 hour. Thank you for sticking with us. If you did, we will all, not all of us, Alan and I will be back here next Friday, same time, same place, and with a new panel of guests. And Alan, we always give you the last line, so go ahead.
Drive home safely.